Okay, so here in Angular, open up the console, and when you're using Chrome, go ahead and try to find that network tab here. For me it's in German, but that shouldn't matter. It's saying simply network. Keep that just open. Go ahead and search a flight. And now let's try to book a flight. And here we can register a new user. Let me just clear that log and let me enter some values. So I'm gonna say for email, just Yannick, and then Yannick. There we go. And a very, very long last name. There we go. And now let me simply hit login. You can simply ignore that one here because he was just trying to find an email address, which is Yannick. So this was our automatically blur call. Let me just remove that again. Now let me click on login. You can see we got a 400 error here. So open that up. Let me just increase the size here. And you can see if you scroll down into the response tab and scroll through it, one or more validation errors occurred, and you can see errors, email, the email field is not a valid email address, last name, the field last name must be a string. So as you can see, we have the information also received here in our network tab in Chrome browser, but that shouldn't make a difference. The only thing that is important for us is that ASP sent over some validation information. So, hey, it failed, and it failed because of those errors, right? So ASP sent us those informations, and as you can see, I'm not able to proceed here, right? So I cannot click on login. So I can do that, but as you can see on the right side, it fires a lot of errors and I cannot proceed. So that's the main difference. We have the information about what's wrong, and now we can go to Angular and also display them for sure. So because right now as a user, I'm not sure what's wrong, right? So for sure I can guess that, okay, it's not an email address, right? But we should for sure show them some validation errors here. So we should display a nice message in a red text, for example, or as an alert. However, the functionality is that we cannot proceed because we have an error and not a succeed status code. And that's the main reason why we have added validation. So super easy to add, right? So returning validation errors late can harm both performance and user experience. And right now, as you have seen, our user does not get any error information. Imagine that you fill out a form completely, and at the end, by clicking the submit button, you see multiple validation errors. Had you known you were making mistakes earlier, you would have stopped proceeding and wasting your time, right? So generally speaking, the earlier you prevent the user from making mistakes, the more accessible it is for the user to fix it. The more time you save the user, and the better the user experience will become. Now, for example, we can inform the user about the errors while typing. In that case, by each word the user types, the client application can send the request to the server to receive the errors. There are still multiple problems with this approach. The user still needs to wait for the response by typing each character. The communication between client and server would become chatty, and as the number of users increases, the number of requests also increases by a lot, right? Which ultimately affects the bandwidth and resource consumption of the server-side application exponentially. So a better way is to also validate the input on the client side. If a user calls the API directly, as we did, using Swagger UI, we still should prevent invalid data from being posted to the application, right? So later on there might be a use case where a user simply uses your REST API through CURL or Postman or whatever, or any mobile application, and then you really want to have that backend validation that we have already implemented. But in order to be a little bit more professional in Angular and to save some server requests and to create a better feedback loop, we want to go ahead and also add front-end client validation. So in the end, we will have two validation positions, front-end and back-end. Well, so the best of all. So in the end, we will have the most security for sure. So you may wonder if there is any way to copy the server-side validation to the client side. The number of seats, for example, has the same validation rule at both client side and server. Wouldn't it be better if I could copy the validation rules for the number of seats field, for example? Keep in mind that there is no necessarily a one-to-one relationship between client and server-side inputs, nor between the validation rules of inputs. Some API inputs may not come from the user interface, even if they all come from the UI. The user may enter them at a different time than the time of posting them to the server. Okay, now that said, let's move on to Angular and add some validation over there.